A crisp winter morning painted the small café in a soft, golden glow as the sunlight filtered through the foggy windows. The café was warm, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air, mingling with the sweet scent of baked pastries. There weren't many customers yet, only a few regulars chatting quietly in the corner. The sound of the door opening jingled as a man entered. He wasn't particularly tall, nor did he stand out with any flashy clothing. In fact, he looked rather ordinary, wearing a thick, worn-out coat and a beanie that was a little too big for him. His shoes had seen better days, and his hands trembled slightly as he pushed the door open, the cold air rushing in behind him. He stood still for a moment, surveying the room. His eyes weren't searching for a seat, they were searching for something else, something deeper. He made his way toward the counter, where Emily, the waitress, was preparing a coffee for another customer. She glanced up and gave him a warm smile, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, even if you weren't. "Hi there. What can I get for you?" Emily asked, her voice cheerful, as she wiped her hands on her apron. The man hesitated for a second, unsure. His eyes darted to the menu above the counter, but quickly moved away, as though he couldn't focus on it. "Just a coffee black," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "Coming right up," Emily said, nodding as she poured the freshly brewed coffee into a clean cup. She handed it to him with a friendly smile, and he took it, his fingers brushing hers for just a second. She noticed the slight tremble in his hand, but said nothing. Emily watched him as he made his way to the corner of the café. His back hunched a little. His shoulders were drooped, as if the weight of the world was on them. She didn't know why, but something about him caught her attention. He looked like he had a story, one that wasn't written on his face, but hidden deep within his eyes. Emily was used to seeing all sorts of people come and go in the café, but this man seemed different. As she continued with her work, she couldn't help but steal glances at him. He sat at a small table, his coffee untouched. His eyes seemed lost in thought, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle that no one else could see. She could tell he was thinking hard about something that had been weighing on him for a long time. The café's door jingled again, and Emily turned to greet the new customers. She had to admit, she wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary today. It was just another slow morning, with a few faces she'd seen before and maybe a couple of new ones. But her curiosity about the man in the corner grew. She didn't know why, but she felt drawn to him, as though fate had somehow pushed her to pay attention to him. A few minutes passed before Emily found herself walking past his table. She was carrying a tray with some pastries when she noticed that the man's coffee cup was still full. She paused for a moment and then approached his table. "Everything okay with the coffee?" she asked, her voice soft, trying not to startle him. He looked up at her, and for a second, his eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe? Regret? She couldn't tell. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Yeah, it's fine," he murmured. Emily hesitated. There was something about the way he spoke, so quiet, so distant. She decided to take a chance. "If you're not in a rush, you can stay as long as you want. We don't mind." He seemed surprised, but only for a brief moment. Then, as though he had made a decision, he gave her a small, faint smile. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded and returned to her work, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than met the eye. Something told her that today wouldn't be just another ordinary day. As time passed, the café began to fill up with more customers. The man in the corner stayed quiet, sipping his coffee slowly, his eyes occasionally flicking toward the window. Emily continued her work, but every so often she would glance over at him, unable to ignore the strange pull she felt. There was a mystery to him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Eventually, as the morning wore on, the man stood up. Emily noticed him gathering his things, a small, worn leather briefcase, and a thick book that looked ancient. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a pang of disappointment. She had somehow hoped he would stay a little longer. But as he approached the counter to pay, she forced a smile. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, trying to keep her tone friendly, even though a part of her wanted to know more about him. "No, thank you," he replied, pulling out his wallet. He seemed a little awkward, fumbling with the cash for a moment. Emily watched him carefully, but it was when he handed over a crumpled bill that she realized something. The man's wallet wasn't the kind you'd expect from someone who seemed like he had little money. It was thick, too thick. The oddity didn't escape her, but she didn't say anything. She simply took the money, gave him his change, and smiled. "Thanks for stopping by," she said. "Have a good day." But just as he turned to leave, something strange happened. The man paused. He turned back, his eyes meeting hers, and for a split second, the world seemed to freeze. There was something in his gaze, something powerful, something ancient. It was as if he had just made a decision. He pulled something from his coat pocket and slid it across the counter toward Emily. It was a card, nothing fancy, just a plain black card with gold lettering. "If you ever need anything," he said quietly, "don't hesitate to call." Emily took the card, a little confused, but trying to remain polite. "Thank you," she said, smiling softly. "I hope you have a wonderful day." The man nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer, before he turned and walked out of the café. Emily stood there, staring at the black card in her hand. She couldn't explain it, but she had a feeling that something big was about to happen, something that would change her life. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Emily tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to the man. His presence had been so enigmatic, so different from the usual customers who came in and out. She couldn't stop wondering who he really was. The next day, as she was opening the cafe, Emily found herself reaching for the black card. It had been sitting in her apron pocket all night, and she had barely given it a second thought. But now, in the quiet of the morning, something compelled her to look at it again. She turned the card over and noticed something she hadn't seen before. On the back, there was a number, an international one. It seemed odd, out of place. She thought about it for a moment, then put the card down. The thought of calling the number seemed ridiculous. Who would answer? What would she even say? But that feeling, the same one she had felt when he first walked into the cafe, persisted. She couldn't shake it. The following week, Emily went to work as usual, trying to push the strange encounter to the back of her mind. Yet, that feeling lingered. It gnawed at her, like an itch she couldn't scratch. She decided that she needed to know more. As fate would have it, a week later, there was an envelope waiting for her at the cafe when she arrived. It was addressed to her in elegant script. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it, and inside was a letter. The letter read, "Thank you for your kindness. You have no idea how rare it is to find someone like you. I'd like to offer you an opportunity you'll only find once in a lifetime. Meet me at the old library on 5th Street at noon tomorrow. Trust me, you won't regret it." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Was this from him? What was going on? Why had he left her this letter? There was no return address, no signature, just the mysterious invitation. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The next day, Emily found herself walking nervously toward the old library on 5th Street. It was a place she had passed countless times, but never once had she considered stepping inside. The building had an air of neglect about it, with peeling paint and a dusty, almost forgotten aura that made it seem like something out of a forgotten era. As she approached the grand double doors, the weight of the letter in her pocket seemed to grow heavier. She couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, like she was about to step into something she couldn't control, something that would change her life forever. Her fingers brushed over the door handle, and with a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The familiar musty smell of old paper and wood greeted her, and she stepped inside, her eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light. The library was surprisingly quiet, save for the sound of her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. Tall shelves lined the walls, filled with ancient books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. The air was thick with history, both the kind you read about in textbooks and the kind you could feel deep in your bones. She wandered deeper into the library, each step taking her further from the familiar world she had known. The letter had said to meet him here at noon, but the building felt eerily empty. Was she even in the right place? For a moment, she considered turning back, but something urged her forward. She couldn't explain it, but she had already come this far. Just as she was about to walk past a row of old leather-bound books, a voice broke the silence. "You came." Emily froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was the man from the café, the same quiet, mysterious tone that had intrigued her so deeply. She turned around quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. He was standing at the far end of the aisle, his figure partially obscured by a stack of books. His posture was still, yet there was a sense of power about him that made her instinctively straighten her shoulders. "You're the one who left the letter?" she asked, her voice shaky despite her efforts to sound calm. He nodded slowly, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel like he could see right through her. "I'm glad you came. I had a feeling you would." He took a step closer, his worn coat swishing softly with his movement. "But now that you're here, I need to ask you something." "What is this all about?" Emily asked, still trying to make sense of the situation. "Why me? And who are you?" He didn't immediately answer. Instead, he looked around as though making sure no one else was nearby, even though she hadn't seen a single person inside the library since she entered. "It's not what you think," he said finally, his voice low. "You probably think I'm just some random stranger who happened to walk into your café. But that's not the case. I'm not who I appear to be." Emily's mind raced. The mystery deepened with each passing moment, and her curiosity began to outweigh the unease she felt. "Then who are you?" she pressed, taking a small step toward him, her eyes never leaving his face. The man studied her for a moment longer before he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, metallic object. He placed it in her hand, and she instinctively closed her fingers around it. As she looked down at what he had given her, her breath caught in her throat. It was a key, a simple, brass key with intricate engravings on it. "This key," the man said quietly, "opens something very important. Something that will change your life. But it comes with a price." "A price?" Emily echoed, her mind reeling. What was he talking about? Why was he giving her this key? And what did it unlock? The man nodded solemnly. "Yes. The price is that you must make a choice, one that will alter the course of your future. I can give you everything you've ever wanted. Wealth, power, knowledge. But only if you're willing to pay the price." Emily stared at the key in her hand, her heart pounding with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're a kind person, Emily," he said, his eyes piercing hers. "I saw that the moment I walked into your cafe. You gave me something that most people don't, compassion. And that's why I'm offering you this opportunity. But I need to know if you're ready to take it." Emily felt a strange pull toward the key, as though it had been waiting for her all along. Her fingers trembled around the brass object, but something deep inside her knew she couldn't turn back now. She had already come this far. "What kind of choice are you asking me to make?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man smiled faintly, a knowing look in his eyes. "The choice to trust me, to believe that what I'm offering you is real, to accept the power that comes with this key, and everything else that follows." The words hung heavy in the air, and for a long moment, Emily stood in silence, weighing her options. Her mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, each one more outlandish than the last. Could he really be telling the truth? Could this key truly unlock the life she had always dreamed of? Before she could respond, the man spoke again, his voice soft but insistent. "I know you have doubts, but I wouldn't ask you to make this choice lightly. I'm giving you a chance, Emily. But once you take it, there's no turning back." The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket of fear and anticipation. Her fingers tightened around the key, and for a moment, she felt the heavy burden of the decision she was about to make. Could she trust him? Was he truly offering her something real, or was it all just a game? Emily began, but she couldn't find the words. She felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into an abyss of unknowns. The man stepped forward, his presence commanding yet calming. "You can walk away," he said, "but I promise you, if you do, you'll never know what could have been. The choice is yours." Emily took a deep breath and closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had never been one for grand decisions. She had always lived her life cautiously, following a simple path. But this felt like something she couldn't ignore. It felt like fate had led her here, and she couldn't walk away without knowing what lay on the other side. When she opened her eyes, she looked straight into his. "I'll trust you," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "I'll take the key." The man's face softened, a hint of pride flickering in his eyes. "Good. You won't regret it." He reached out and took the key from her hand, turning it over between his fingers. He spoke the words that would change everything. "Now let's go." Without another word, he turned and began walking toward the back of the library, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. Emily hesitated for just a moment, but then, with a deep breath, she followed him. As she walked behind him, the air seemed to grow heavier with every step, as though the very walls of the library were closing in on her. Finally, they reached a small door at the back of the library, hidden from view by a row of bookshelves. The man slid the key into the lock, and with a soft click, the door creaked open. Emily stepped inside, her breath catching in her throat. What she saw before her was beyond anything she could have imagined. The room was vast, filled with shelves that stretched endlessly into the darkness. But it wasn't the books that caught her attention. It was the treasure inside. Piles of gold coins, jewels, and priceless artifacts filled the space, gleaming in the dim light. "This," the man said, his voice filled with reverence, "is what the key unlocks. But remember, the price is more than just wealth. The power to control your destiny, to shape your life, is now in your hands." Emily felt a rush of excitement and fear. She had made her choice. But what came next was a question she didn't have the answer to. Was she ready for the power she had just unlocked? The possibilities were endless, but so were the consequences. Her life would never be the same again. The moment Emily stepped into the treasure room, the air seemed to thicken around her. The sound of her breath, shallow and ragged, filled the space as her eyes scanned the unimaginable wealth that lay before her. The room felt like it belonged in a dream, a place no one could possibly walk into, let alone stumble upon. Yet here she was, standing at the threshold of something more than just gold and jewels. The weight of the key in her pocket, now silent and cold, seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. She was no longer just a waitress with a simple life. She was something else, something greater, yet far more vulnerable than she could have imagined. The man, still standing in the doorway, watched her with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see into her soul. His eyes never wavered as they followed her movements, like a silent observer who had witnessed countless others stand where she was now. But Emily wasn't like the others. She was different. She could feel it, the weight of her decision, the truth of the choice she had just made. As the man took a step toward her, his voice echoed softly through the chamber. "You see it now, don't you?" he asked, his tone full of quiet understanding. "This is just a glimpse of what lies ahead. You've unlocked the door to a life most people can only dream of. The question is, what will you do with it?" Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What could she possibly do with it? She had never been a person who yearned for wealth. She had always been content with her small, unassuming life, a life where she served coffee and chatted with customers. Yet standing here, surrounded by riches beyond comprehension, something inside her began to stir. It wasn't greed that she felt. No, it was something else, something deeper, more primal. Power. The kind of power that could reshape her world, her future, and perhaps even the world around her. I don't know," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She took a tentative step forward, her eyes never leaving the piles of gold and the glittering jewels that beckoned her closer. "I never asked for this. I never wanted anything like this." The man smiled faintly, a knowing look in his eyes. "No one ever does. That's the nature of this power. It doesn't come with a request. It chooses those who are worthy, or those who have something they need to learn. You, Emily, are here because you were meant to be here. The key didn't just unlock this room. It unlocked something within you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. His words felt like a truth that reached deep into her core, a truth she hadn't fully realized until now. She wasn't just standing in a room full of wealth. She was standing at the precipice of something greater than herself, a world where she could shape her own destiny, where she could forge her own path, free from the constraints that had once held her back. But with that power came responsibility, a responsibility that was far greater than she had anticipated. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling despite herself. She couldn't deny the lure of the treasures before her, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that there was something darker at play here. The man's cryptic words, the secrecy of this hidden room, all pointed to something much more complex than a mere gift of wealth. There had to be more to it, more than she could possibly understand. "I want nothing," the man replied, his voice calm, almost soothing. "You're the one who needs to decide what you want. The wealth in this room, the power it holds, it's yours to command. But remember, there is a cost. There's always a cost." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time, she truly understood the gravity of the decision she had made. This wasn't just a matter of wealth. It was about something much deeper, something that could change the very fabric of who she was. Could she truly bear the weight of such a choice? Would she be able to handle the consequences, whatever they might be? Her eyes flickered to the piles of riches around her. Gold coins glimmered like stars in the dim light, their edges sharp and glistening with potential. Jewels, diamonds, and precious stones sparkled in the shadows, each one a symbol of a future she had never dreamed of. It was overwhelming. And yet, despite the chaos of thoughts swirling in her mind, a small voice inside her whispered, "What if this is your chance? What if this is the moment that changes everything?" The man stepped closer, his presence almost suffocating now. "The question, Emily, is not whether you can have it all. The question is whether you can live with the consequences of your choices. Wealth and power are fleeting, but the choices you make, the path you walk, they define who you are. That is the true price." Emily swallowed hard, her mind spinning with the weight of a decision in front of her. She had come this far, and yet there was still one question that burned in her mind. What happens if I walk away? If I leave all of this behind, what happens then? The man's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "You'll walk away, just as you came in, but you'll never forget what you saw here. You'll always wonder, always ask yourself what could have been. And in the end, it's not about the riches or the power. It's about the choice to seize what's in front of you, to take control of your destiny, or to let it slip away." Emily closed her eyes, the weight of his words settling heavily in her chest. She had always been a person who valued simplicity, who had found contentment in the small moments of life. But now, she stood at the crossroads of her future, faced with the kind of decision that most people would never have to make. Could she walk away from everything she had ever known, from the quiet life she had built for herself, in exchange for a future of unimaginable power and influence? Could she handle the burden of such a gift? Her thoughts raced. She thought of the elderly man in the café, the one who had watched her with such quiet intensity. He hadn't given her anything in the traditional sense. No money, no material gifts. But he had given her something far more valuable, a glimpse into a different world, one that lay just beyond her reach. A world where she could rewrite her story, shape her future, and perhaps even change the course of history itself. But was she ready for that? She turned back to the man in front of her, his figure looming in the dim light. She could see the patience in his eyes, the understanding that he was waiting for her to make the choice. It was her decision now, and there would be no turning back. Taking a deep breath, she reached out and placed her hand on the pile of gold coins in front of her. The cold, metallic surface sent a shiver through her fingers, but the sensation quickly melted into something else, a sense of power, a sense of ownership. This was hers if she wanted it. This world, this future, it was within her grasp. With a steady hand, she pulled the key from her pocket and held it out before her. The man nodded, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. "I knew you would make the right choice," he said softly. "Now your life begins." The words hung in the air like a final echo, and as Emily stood in that room, surrounded by wealth and power beyond her wildest dreams, she realized that she had made her choice. She had stepped into a world where anything was possible, where the future was hers to command. But with that power came responsibility. Responsibility that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The key was no longer just an object. It was a symbol of her new reality, a reality where she could shape her own destiny. And as she turned away from the treasure, walking toward the door that would lead her back into the world she once knew, she knew that her life would never be the same again. The world outside awaited her, and with the key in her hand, she was ready to face whatever came next. But no matter where her journey took her, one thing was certain. She had unlocked something far greater than wealth. She had unlocked the power to change her life forever.